In April of 1873, a surveyor in Fayette County, West Virginia, was offered a choice. He could take his wages in cash at $20, or he could take them in land. He chose the land. 73 acres on the north side of the New River, deep in the gorge, between Arbuckle and Dunloop Creeks. The surveyor's name was William Dabney Thurmond. He was 53 years old. He was a Confederate veteran, a Virginia native, a devout Baptist, and a man who believed, with the full weight of that word, that he could build something good on a piece of ground nobody else wanted. Within 40 years, his 73 acres would become the busiest freight depot on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. More coal would pass through it than through Cincinnati and Richmond combined. 75,000 passengers a year would step off trains into a town with 2 hotels, 2 banks, a movie theater, a jewelry store, and the longest-running poker game in recorded history. And within 40 years after that, the town would have 5 residents. This is the story of a man who tried to build a righteous town on top of a coal seam, and what happened when the coal was worth more than the righteousness. The records don't lie. Let's read them. William Dabney Thurmond was born on November 11, 1820, in Amherst County, Virginia. He came west to what was then still Virginia around 1844, settling along Arbuckle Creek in Fayette County. Thurmond was not a miner. By trade he was a farmer, a surveyor, and later a businessman. He married, raised a family, and joined the Baptist Church, which would shape everything he built and everything he lost. When the Civil War came, Thurmond didn't sit it out. He organized a company of irregular Confederate cavalry called Thurmond's Rangers, commanded by his brother Philip. They operated as scouts, spies, and raiders in the mountains of what would soon become West Virginia. The Confederacy considered them partisans. The Union considered them bushwhackers. In late 1863, Union troops burned the Thurmond family home on Arbuckle Creek. William Thurmond declared himself an unreconstructed rebel and refused to sign an oath of allegiance when the war ended. He moved his family away, waited, and came back in the early 1870s. He came back to a valley that was about to change. The new River Gorge is one of the oldest geological formations in the Appalachians. The river itself runs north through a canyon that drops, in some places, more than 1,000 feet from rim to water. Its rock walls are sandstone and shale, laid down in the Pennsylvanian period more than 300 million years ago. Running through those layers, in seams that could be measured in feet rather than inches, was coal. Not just any coal. The New River coalfield produced what the industry called smokeless coal, a high-grade bituminous that burned cleaner and hotter than the soft coal found elsewhere in West Virginia. Smokeless coal was prized by the Navy for warships, by the railroads for locomotives, and by steel mills for coke production. It was, pound for pound, the most valuable coal in eastern America. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railway had been under construction for years, pushing a main line from the Atlantic coast at Newport News, Virginia, to the Ohio River at Huntington, West Virginia. The route ran directly through the New River Gorge, following the river through some of the deepest and most rugged terrain in the Appalachians. Construction was completed through the gorge in January of 1873. When the last spike went in, the C&O had connected the eastern seaboard to the interior of the continent, and every smokeless coal seam it passed on the way was suddenly accessible to the markets of the world. Captain Thurmond saw what that meant. In April of 1873, he accepted the 73 acres on the north bank of the New River as payment for his surveying work. The land sat at a junction where feeder creeks came down from the coal fields above and met the main line of the C&O. Coal mined in the hills could be brought down to the river, loaded onto trains, and shipped east to the steel mills and power plants of the coast. The captain didn't own the coal, he owned the ground the coal had to cross. For the first decade, almost nothing happened. In 1875, 75 people lived on the property. There were 2 general stores and 2 coal company offices. One house had been built on the actual town site by 1884. The gorge was so steep and so remote that there was no road in or out. The only way to reach Thurmond was by train or by foot along the river. That changed in 1888. The C&O built a 2-story wood-frame passenger depot on land Captain Thurmond had donated the year before. A post office opened under the name Arbuckle, the name the captain had originally chosen for his community. The name was rejected by the Postal Service. The town became Thurmond instead. In 1891, Captain Thurmond built a hotel. The Hotel Thurmond was a simple frame building with 25 guest rooms located on what would become Commercial Row, the strip of buildings that fronted directly onto the railroad tracks. There were no streets. The tracks were the main street, and the captain's hotel had a rule that set it apart from every other lodging house in the coal fields. No liquor, no gambling. The captain was a Baptist, and he meant it. You can hear already the sound of something about to go wrong. In 1892, a coal operator named Thomas G. McKell negotiated with the C&O to build a branch line up Dunloop Creek from a junction on the main line at Thurmond. The Dunloop branch was completed to the town of Glen Jean by late 1893. On November 7th of that year, the first coal was shipped from the Collins Colliery Company. Within months, the branch was one of the busiest spurs in the New River region, serving 26 mines in the rich Sewell coal seam. Thurmond became a boomtown overnight. Coal poured down the creeks and onto the main line. The C&O expanded the rail yard, built water tanks and coaling towers, and established maintenance shops. A 70-foot turntable was installed, then quickly replaced with a 100-foot one to handle the larger locomotives. An elevated coaling tower built in 1914 held 100,000 gallons. A standpipe tower erected in 1927 held 210,000. The infrastructure of moving coal at industrial scale consumed every flat inch of ground between the river and the mountainside. The men who worked the mines above Thurmond lived in coal camps strung along the hollows, company houses, company stores, scrip instead of American currency. The work was dangerous in ways that the freight tonnage numbers never captured. Cave-ins, gas explosions, black lung, and equipment failures were constant risks. A miner who went into the mountain in the morning was never guaranteed to come out in the evening. The coal that made Thurmond's banks the richest in West Virginia was cut from the rock by men whose names rarely appeared in the ledgers that recorded the profits. And many of those men were black. The New River coalfields drew laborers from across the South, including large numbers of African Americans who came north looking for wages that Jim Crow-era agriculture couldn't provide. In the coal camps, black miners worked the same seams and faced the same dangers as white miners, but they lived in segregated housing on separate hillsides, separate churches, separate sections of the company store. On payday, they crossed the river into Ballyhack alongside everyone else, and their money spent the same. But the communities they built in the hollows above Thurmond were parallel and apart, documented in census rolls and company records, but rarely in the histories that got written later. When the town emptied out, their names went first. Down in Thurmond proper, the captain built about 30 houses on the mountainside above Commercial Row and rented them to railroad workers and their families. Money arrived faster than the town could spend it. McKell, the man who had built the branch line, looked across the river at Captain Thurmond's dry, pious, liquor-free town and saw an opportunity. On the south bank of the New River, just outside the captain's jurisdiction, McKell built the Dunglen Hotel. It opened in 1900. The building was 4.5 stories tall, with 100 rooms. Opening night featured a full orchestra brought in from Cincinnati. There was a barber shop, a laundry, a post office, an ice plant, and a bar that never closed. On the north side of the river, Captain Thurmond's town was Baptist, dry, and orderly. On the south side, McKell's hotel was wide open. The area around it became known as Ballyhack, and it was exactly what the name implies. Saloons and gambling houses sprang up to serve the miners and train crews who crossed the river on payday. Whiskey sold by the quart. Stakes ran as high as $50,000. The area's largest coal mine transaction, a sale worth more than $1 million, was conducted inside the Dunglen's walls. A gambler, according to local legend, once lost his entire coal mine in a single hand. And then there was the poker game. According to both Ripley's Believe It or Not and the Guinness Book of World Records, the Dunglen Hotel hosted the longest continuous poker game in recorded history. It ran for 14 years. Think about that arithmetic. A devout Baptist built a town on a set of moral principles he believed in with everything he had. Directly across the river, within sight of his front porch, a man built a 100-room monument to everything the Baptist opposed. The poker game at the Dunglen outlasted the captain himself. Captain William Dabney Thurmond died in 1910. He was 89 years old. By the time he was buried, the town that carried his name had become the chief railroad center on the entire C&O main line. In that year, Thurmond originated more freight tonnage than Cincinnati, Ohio, and Richmond, Virginia combined. 75,000 passengers passed through the depot. The banks on Commercial Row were the richest in the state of West Virginia. The captain had built the town. McKell had built the party. Between them, they had created something neither of them could control. The captain had tried one more thing before he died. In 1901, he had Thurmond officially incorporated as a town. The incorporation gave him, finally, the legal authority to enforce prohibition within the town limits. Liquor was banned on the north side of the river by municipal law. It was the last act of a man trying to hold the line between what he believed and what the money wanted. It didn't matter. The Dunglen was on the south side. McKell's hotel was outside the town limits. The poker game kept running. The whiskey kept flowing. His law stopped at the river. For 2 decades, Thurmond ran on 2 engines at once, coal and vice. The freight depot processed tonnage that rivaled major American cities. 15 passenger trains arrived daily. The town had restaurants, clothing stores, dry goods stores, a jewelry store, a movie theater, and business offices stacked along Commercial Row. Across the river, Ballyhack did what Ballyhack did. Marshal Harrison Ashe, the town's law enforcement, broke heads when he could but made little headway against the overall problem. People called Thurmond the Dodge City of the East. Others called it, more simply, hell with a river through it. Nobody built a road. That detail is the hinge of the whole story, and almost nobody notices it. Until 1921, the only way into or out of Thurmond was by train. The town that handled more freight than Cincinnati had no road. No automobile could reach it. Every person, every piece of equipment, every sack of flour, and every bottle of whiskey arrived and departed on the C&O Railway. The railroad was not just the main street, it was the only street. In 1921, a road was finally built. It was supposed to connect Thurmond to the wider world. What it actually did was give the wider world a way to drain it. Once people could drive, they could leave. Once they could leave, they didn't have to spend their money at Commercial Row or at the Dunglen. The road that was meant to open Thurmond up was the mechanism that began to empty it out. The next blow came in 1922, when a serious fire burned through parts of the town's commercial district. Buildings that had been thrown up fast during the boom years burned fast too. Not everything was rebuilt. Then came West Virginia state prohibition in 1914, which had already shut down Ballyhack and turned the Dunglen into just a hotel. National prohibition followed in 1920. The Dunglen limped on without its bar revenue, but the engine that had driven its economy was gone. On July 22, 1930, someone set the Dunglen Hotel on fire. The blaze started around 10:30 at night. By the time the fire departments from Mount Hope and Oak Hill arrived, the building was fully engulfed. No guests were killed, but 2 men suffered burns. The 4.5-story, 100-room wooden structure, with its wrap-around veranda and its ballroom where symphonies had played through the night, burned to the foundation. Damages totaled $100,000, roughly $1.6 million in today's money. Faulty electrical wiring was blamed officially. The fire was widely considered arson. The 14-year poker game was over. Nobody rebuilt the Dunglen. Its property was abandoned, and with it went the last of the energy that had made Thurmond famous. Depression hit what remained. National Bank of Thurmond closed in 1931. By 1935, the new River Bank had moved its operations to Oak Hill. Businesses shuttered one by one along Commercial Row. The census tells the rest of the story in numbers. Thurmond had 315 residents in 1910, the year the captain died. It peaked at 462 in 1930. By 1940 it was 339. By 1950 it was less than 200. The diesel locomotive, which didn't need water or coal at every stop the way a steam engine did, made Thurmond's coaling towers and water tanks obsolete. The C&O stopped its steam operations through the town in 1949. Rail yard jobs disappeared. Within a year, the depot closed. In 1963, the Fayette Hotel, the last hotel in Thurmond, was destroyed by fire. The post office, which had been housed inside it, went with it. For a time the post office moved to the old Fitzgerald Commissary on Commercial Row. That too would close in 1995. What had been a town with 2 hotels, 2 banks, and 75,000 passengers a year was now a town with no hotel, no bank, and no post office. The buildings didn't fall down. That's the strange part of the story. In most abandoned towns, weather and neglect reduce the structures to foundations within a generation. Thurmond's Commercial Row survived because of the gorge itself. Steep canyon walls sheltered the buildings from the worst of the wind. Active freight traffic on the C&O tracks kept the right-of-way maintained, and nobody tore anything down because nobody had a reason to build anything new. Thurmond was preserved not by intention but by irrelevance. It simply stopped mattering enough for anyone to change it. Up the steep and narrow drive on the side of the mountain, above the depot and the rail yard and the empty storefronts of Commercial Row, the Thurmond Union Church still stood. It had been built around 1927 on the foundation of an earlier church that the McKell family had helped pay for. The building had a bell tower you couldn't see from the road, Sunday school rooms on the first floor, a sanctuary on the second. Over the years, it had served 3 denominations at once: Baptist, Methodist, and Presbyterian. They shared the building because there weren't enough of any one congregation to justify their own. Think about what that church saw from the hilltop. It saw the captain's dream arrive and leave. It saw the Dunglen rise across the river and burn. It saw 15 trains a day become none. It saw the banks close and the stores go dark and the houses empty out one family at a time. It saw the road come in 1921 and watched the people use it to drive away. The church outlived all of it. By the 1970s, Thurmond was a ghost town in everything but name. A few families held on. The tracks still ran through the gorge, but the trains no longer stopped. The buildings of Commercial Row stood intact because nobody had bothered to tear them down and nobody had built anything to replace them. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed legislation establishing the new River Gorge National River, placing the gorge under the protection of the National Park Service. In 1984, the Thurmond Historic District was added to the National Register of Historic Places. 2 years later, the filmmaker John Sayles used Thurmond as the primary filming location for Matewan, his movie about the West Virginia mine wars, because the town still looked, in every physical detail, exactly like a 1920s Appalachian coal town. Nothing had changed because nothing had come along to change it. The National Park Service restored the C&O depot in 1995 and turned it into a visitor center. Today, about 80% of the town is owned by the Park Service. Amtrak's Cardinal line still stops at Thurmond 3 times a week. In 2022, 399 passengers used the station. In 2023, it was 466. It is one of the least used stations in the entire Amtrak network. The 2020 census recorded 5 permanent residents. The 2026 estimate puts it at 2. 2 people live in a town that once handled more freight than Cincinnati and Richmond combined. 2 people live where 75,000 passengers a year once stepped off trains into a boomtown with 2 banks, 2 hotels, a jewelry store, and a 14-year poker game running across the river. The church is still on the hill. Its bell tower is still there. On the second floor, the sanctuary sits where 3 denominations once shared the same room because none of them had enough people left to fill it alone. Now none of them do. Captain William Dabney Thurmond built his town on 2 convictions. He believed coal would make it rich, and he believed his faith would keep it good. He was right about the first one. The coal made Thurmond richer than he could have imagined. It made the banks the wealthiest in West Virginia. It brought 75,000 passengers a year to a place you could only reach by train. He was wrong about the second one. The money brought the Dunglen brought the poker game. That poker game outlasted the captain, and when the money left, it took everything with it. The banks, the hotels, the stores, the depot, the people. Everything except the church. Up on the hill, above the empty tracks and the silent storefronts, the bell tower stands where it stood since 1927. The sanctuary is locked. The Sunday school rooms are dark. But the foundation it sits on is older than the building itself, laid by the generation that came before, back when the town was still becoming what the captain wanted it to be. He wanted Arbuckle. He got Thurmond. He wanted righteousness. He got a poker game. He wanted forever. He got 73 acres and a church on the hill that nobody comes to anymore. The records don't lie. The question is whether anyone reads them before the last two people are gone,